Did you know that a few simple factors can completely change and transform your podcast's visibility? Are you curious to know how the algorithm decides which shows to promote? Stick around because today we are revealing the top 3 factors that you need to know. Hello. Welcome back to As It Relates to Podcasting, the show that you need when it comes to launching, growing, and monetizing your show. I'm Simona, and today we are diving into one of the most talked about factors in podcasting, which is the podcast algorithm. Have you ever wondered why some shows skyrocket to popularity while other podcasts just have no traction at all? The algorithm, believe it or not, plays a really big role in this. And understanding how it works can help get your podcast in front of more listeners. I've got a super jam-packed episode today outlining the 3 key factors that impact the podcast algorithm and what you can do to work with it and not against it. But before we go any further, I do want to let you know about my podcast launch blueprint, which will help you tap into every single thing you need to know when it comes to starting your podcast, launching your podcast, and growing your podcast. The tips that you can find in this blueprint will help your podcast when it comes to visibility, which ultimately will help your show with its growth and your listener engagement. I'll tell you a little bit more about it later, but let's get into today's conversation. We're going to cover 3 main sections today. The first one is your subscriber growth and engagement. The second one is listener retention and completion rates. And the third one is reviews and ratings. Stick with me because this episode is packed with so many things that you can take away and implement right away. And also, we'll touch a little bit on the SEO side of things. Okay, let's get into it. Section 1 is subscriber growth and engagement. And here is why it matters. When platforms like Apple and Spotify recommend different shows, they're paying attention to how many new subscribers a show is gaining over time. But it's not about getting new listeners. It's about keeping them engaged. The algorithm favors shows that show steady growth and active engagement, meaning your listeners are interested in your topics, hitting that subscribe button, downloading your episodes, and coming back for more. Don't be afraid to ask your listeners to follow along with your podcast and download those new episodes. So, as you're listening right now, please feel free to do that in whatever podcast app you're listening to. Number 2, consistency is key. Uploading your episodes consistently is crucial for subscriber growth. They're not mutually exclusive, and it doesn't mean that just because you upload a podcast episode, your show will grow. But if your upload schedule is all over the place, it is going to be harder for your audience to stay loyal to you, and the algorithm could deprioritize your show. So you want to make sure that you create a content calendar for your episodes, that you know exactly what is going out and when, and that you hit those targets as best as you possibly can. And that doesn't, FYI, mean every single week. It can mean every 2 weeks. The importance is consistency. The importance is showing up. By focusing on growing your subscribers and keeping them engaged in your content, you're giving the algorithm a reason to push your show in front of new, potentially loyal listeners. The second part is listener retention and completion rates. This isn't something that people talk about all the time, but it's really something that's so important to highlight. And here is why it matters. The longer that people listen to your episodes, the better it is for your overall ranking. Platforms want to recommend podcasts that hook listeners in from start to finish. So if your completion rates are high, the algorithm notices. And if your listeners are dropping off halfway through, the algorithm could deprioritize your show for it. So focus on crafting those exciting intros and plan your content in a way that's going to keep people engaged all the way through until the end. You can also tease what's coming later on in an episode at the beginning to influence and to help encourage people to stay to the end. It's also really important to make sure that you are structuring your episodes in a way that will promote that listener retention. Create that content that's going to keep your listener listening through all the way until the end. Avoid those really long-winded introductions and just get to the point. There is so much content out there nowadays. We want to get into the nitty-gritty right off the bat. When you focus on improving your completion rate and your retention rate, you're signaling to the algorithm that your show is worth listening to and that your content is worth recommending to others. The third section here is your reviews and your ratings. Now, there is some discussion. Are these actually metrics that impact the algorithm? And I say yes for 2 reasons. I think it's really important to have ratings on your podcast because that metric is signaled to the podcast platform that people are enjoying the content. That is something that is measurable. Things like reviews, they're not tracked the same on the back end, but they are really good for social proof. So you want to make sure that you're collecting both ratings and reviews in your overall promotion of your podcast episodes. I also want you to think about it like this. A podcast that has a lot of high ratings and a lot of high reviews signals to the algorithm that your show is something that people enjoy consuming. So naturally, they're going to take that and they will continue to push it in front of new users, new listeners, new audience. And this can lead to better placements in charts or recommendations. But the way in which we get this is by engaging with our audience, actively asking for a rating or a review. So if you haven't done so yet, please feel free to review As It Relates to Podcasting and leave us a 5-star rating letting us know if you liked our content. Creators care about your feedback, and it helps you build community and trust. You can also make sure to thank your listeners for leaving those reviews and reading them live on the air if you would like to. Now, I'm going to add in something extra before we wrap up today's conversation, and this is the SEO component of your show. All of these efforts are amazing, done individually or even when you pair them all together. But none of it really matters, quote unquote, at the end of the day, if the content that you're creating isn't actually exciting and enticing for people. You want to make sure that you're looking at your episode titles. How are your show notes written? And how is the description of your podcast answering questions? What are your people looking for? What are they searching for? And how is your podcast episode the answer to their questions? Make sure, even if you don't know anything about SEO, that you are always prioritizing titling your podcast episodes in a way that is going to encourage people to click that play button. So to recap quickly, number 1 is that subscriber growth and engagement. Focus on getting and retaining your subscribers. Number 2 is listener retention and completion rates. Keep listeners engaged all the way to the end. Number 3 is those ratings and reviews. Encourage your audience, encourage your listener to give you some feedback on your show. And of course, my bonus one was the SEO titles, show notes, and show description. These are 3 powerful ways that you can boost your visibility, your engagement, and ultimately where you're sitting in the charts. If you want more tips and more, grab my podcast launch blueprint, which you can find in the episode notes below. It is completely free, and I know it's going to teach you so much about growing your podcast. Thank you so much for being here on this episode, and I will see you on the next one.